The Mojave Wasteland is one of the more unique areas that we have explored within the Fallout universe, with extremely interesting factions littering the land with their own goals for taking over the New Vegas Strip. As the courier is almost killed and brought back to life, they would explore this land, witnessing what all these factions had on offer and what they truly wanted for the Wasteland and its people. They would witness Kaiser's Legion rapidly take over towns in their brutal nature, the NCR camps looking out over the Wasteland majorly underarmed, waiting for the Legion's attacks, as well as the Lucky 38 casino owner Mr. House, who after 200 years had woken back up and looks to rebuild his precious strip and take it from the invading forces. But as the courier continues to help with the citizens of the Wasteland, he has to inevitably decide what is best for the Wasteland. Who would be the best faction to help rebuild society and drive humanity into a new age? Well, in this video we look into all of the possible factions, studying their basic lore, their pros and cons, and eventually decide who could possibly take over the Mojave Wasteland and claim New Vegas. This will include some of the other factions who may not have had a big role within the New Vegas story, but at some point were present within that area. But before we start this video looking into the pros and cons of all the factions, I do want to say that please remember this is my opinion on who could rule the Wasteland. This is just a game and you can disagree without getting fully angry. End of the day, Obsidian made a world that allowed for pure player choice, and it's all down to what you want for the Mojave Wasteland. Also remember, it's just a game. These factions don't really exist and it's just a bit of fun. So if you're getting abusive in the comments because your favourite faction didn't win, maybe have a look in the mirror or touch some grass. But for the rest of you civil people, let's look at all the possible factions and decide who would be the best one to run and rebuild New Vegas and the Mojave Wasteland. We start this debate with the basic lore behind each of the factions, as well as what they offer to the table in terms of positives. And of course we start with the big boys of the Mojave, the New California Republic, also known as the NCR. The NCR are one of the original factions who formed not long after emerging from Vault 15 in 2097. Originally just being a few citizens living in the town of Shady Sands, the people just lived day to day just trying to survive and build up their resources. However, after dealing with raiders such as the Great Khans on a regular basis, their leader Aradesh and his daughter Tandy would set up the New California Republic, expanding their influence all over the land, setting up trade links with cities, and eventually becoming a safe haven for people, where they could live life away from the threats of raiders such as the Great Khans as well as bandits. Tandy was their most influential leader during their creation and expansion, and even to this date, and wanted to create a real safe haven for all Wastelanders. Since then, up until 2281, the NCR still stick quite close to their original principles. To start with, although at the beginning their society was run by a father and daughter until her death, the NCR society is run by the belief that free speech and choice should come at the heart of an individual's life. Democracy was massively valued as a key right that all should have, and because of that it meant if people liked someone's views and saw them as a leader within their community, they would be able to vote them into office. The other side of it is, if they didn't like the way someone was running a society, they could easily get rid of them if they had enough people behind them, like with President Joanna Tibbetts, who their people and Congress believed to be far too timid in office. Alongside this, the NCR is a very open society, allowing anyone to join it if they so wish. This includes all types of people, including mutants and ghouls. The only thing people have to be is respectful of their laws and be willing to contribute to their society through taxes. With this, women and men are both equal within their society and are allowed to all be free in the way they express themselves. The only thing citizens have to know is that they will be enlisted at any time to their army. However, most citizens who live under the NCR flag are extremely loyal and are proud to be living under the flag of the two-headed bear. With the large army, protection is made clear to anyone who may live under this flag, with the NCR claiming they would do anything to protect their towns and cities, making security one of their strong suits, especially as they also have the help from the extremely skillful warriors known as the Rangers, who are deadly in combat. taking out individuals way before they have even seen them. As well as this, as they expanded their territory, the NCR would also claim the Hoover Dam, allowing for power and clean water to be spread all over their towns and cities. At the end of the day, the NCR are probably the largest faction within the list. Their society is extremely well designed with their own economy, large successful trade links, and a real focus on security, free speech, and choice amongst its citizens. Its society is a vision into the old world. It wants to be the pure democracy that America once was, and wants to rebuild America with that one vision. Moving over to the other side of the spectrum, we have Caesar's Legion. And yes, it is Caesar, that's what they say in the game, and that's the Latin way of saying it. I'm so sick and tired of comments like that. Anyway, moving on. This faction first began as part of the followers of the Apocalypse. Here, 3 members were to venture out into the wasteland, specifically the Grand Canyon, to search for old world literature and books on old tribal dialogue. During their ventures, Edward Sallow, the man who would become Kaiser, would find books on the Roman Legion and the rule of Julius Caesar, and study them night and day. Eventually, he would get captured by a tribe called the Blackfoot tribe, who would hold him prisoner. However, Sallow witnessed that this tribe was terrible in combat, totally unorganized, and were just in a constant battle with other tribes. Sallow, now understanding military tactics thanks to his endless reading books on the Roman army and society, helped train this tribe to be more efficient in combat, looking after weapons and actually holding their ground in battles. After this, his tribe became one of the best and would wipe out others. But instead of just focusing on one tribe, he would bring those defeated into his ranks, forming them into one large tribe that he would eventually call Caesar's Great Legion, renaming himself as Kaiser. Caesar's Legion's positives come from the fact that they are just so effective as a society. They know exactly what they want and will do anything to get it. Kaiser himself is probably one of the strongest leaders in the Wasteland, bringing together rival tribes to fight as one, forming a strong economy and having strict laws, meaning that anyone who goes against their laws in their towns or cities will be executed and cast out of their society. Their army is so powerful that they spread across the land within mere months, rivaling the NCR in military strength. Those at the top are so loyal to Kaiser that they will make sure they do his every want and need and will stop at nothing to get it done. Because of this pure military might, it is pretty much guaranteed that if you lived under the Legion's banner, you will be protected at all costs, as no one in their right mind would want to attack their forces or face their wrath. Whilst it might seem like a pretty brutal faction, many of their residents who live under Kaiser's rule actually like the security the society offers, as it's far better than living out in the lawless wasteland where bandits and raiders rule the land and there's no taxes. Especially as most of the citizens are free to eat, drink and live to their own accord, with Kaiser not really caring what they get up to. However, the only time where they have to do what they are told is when a higher up official gives them an order. But apart from that, the ones that live under the Legion are free to be who they want to be to some extent. Moving back to a more homely environment, we have Mr. House. Mr. Robert Edwin House was actually a proud business owner back before the war in 2077. At the age of just 22, House went on to form the incredibly successful business known as Robco, which would explode onto the scene, making him incredibly wealthy. With this new wealth, he would go on to buy other businesses along the way, such as Repcon Aerospace, as well as the Lucky 38 Hotel and Casino. However, House saw that nuclear war was coming and worked on a secret plan to make sure the city of New Vegas was safe from the destruction. Utilizing the Lucky 38 Casino and his other tech, the plan was to disable all missiles heading in their direction. Whilst this was going on, his body would be placed in a life support device, with his brain being transferred to an enormous supercomputer. His plans were going well. However, 20 hours before his plan would come to fruition, the bombs hit, destroying the land around and ruining his ultimate plans to keep the area safe. Whilst Mr. House continued his operating system he was using suffered system crashes regularly and eventually forced House into a coma for almost 50 years. In 2138, House regained consciousness, however didn't become fully active again until the year of 2274, when his Securitrons emerged from the Lucky 38. Siding with the NCR, who had ventured into the area, Mr. House enabled them to take the Hoover Dam and supply the area with power and water, opening up the New Vegas Strip once again to paying clients. Mr. House is a relic relic of a world that once was. He knows exactly how to run an enterprise and make an absolute fortune. He knows how life used to be back in the day, how corruption and politicians ran it into the ground, and knows that the world cannot go through that again. Alongside this, his technological skills are beyond incredible. He created one of the most advanced companies the world had ever seen in Robco, and his Securitrons are proof of that. Speaking of which, this is a prime reason why his leadership is great. He is able to defend himself from some of the fiercest enemies who try to harm his businesses. He has an overwhelming force of deadly Securitrons who could easily outdo any army they come across, and they can constantly be brought back through engineering. Along with this protection, Mr. House really does care so much for New Vegas. The fact that he poured all of his hard-earned money back in the day to protect this area shows that he really does want to keep the people safe. Saying that, he also just wants to make sure that the war never happens again, and does not like any war-hungry leader trying to take over his New Vegas strip. It's pretty safe to say that Mr. House would never want war again, would never want to see pointless death, as he just wants to build up New Vegas to be what it was back in the pre-war years. Fully focused on technology, security and prosperity, it's safe to say that Mr. House wants to rebuild in a positive way and not recreate the events of the past. And speaking of the past, that brings us on to some of the lesser factions who weren't as present within the year of 2281, starting with the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood of Steel was originally part of the United States Armed Forces, more specifically the security team who were based out within the Mariposa military base. However, during the years prior to the Great War, the soldiers based there discovered the scientists were testing the forced evolutionary virus on military prisoners. This caused a rebellion between the scientists and the military individuals, with Captain Roger Maxson taking the scientists and interrogating them about their actions. During this, however, the Great War began, and the bombs destroyed all their communications in the process. Captain Maxson was desperately trying to get information out of the head researcher Leon von Felden, but realized he had to change his plans. The day after the bombs hit, Maxson ordered all the troops and their families to leave the base, as the outside was showing no signs of radiation in the atmosphere. As they were about to leave, all of the scientists were executed and were buried just outside the base. After they all left the base under the lead of Captain Roger Maxson, they headed to the Lost Hills government bunker in the south. It would not be long after this where they would set up the Brotherhood of Steel, as he saw how people around him were slowly succumbing to depression. This faction, however, would split into multiple chapters all over the country. However, they would all have the same original goals. That was to seek out, seize and regulate pre-war technology all over the wasteland. It's pretty safe to say that the Brotherhood of Steel have probably some of the best technology in all of the wasteland, with extremely powerful power armor, laser weaponry, as well as other experimental pre-war technology only owned by them. To live in a Brotherhood of Steel society, it would be heavily secure, with turrets, walls and military outposts ready to tackle anything that would come towards them. Because of their origins, the people within the Brotherhood ranks would be extremely well trained for any type of combat, which would include air superiority. Loyalty within the Brotherhood is extremely high as well, with all those joining being extremely proud of their faction and what they stand for. They have clear roles as well, with a hierarchy structure that allows for individuals to have something to strive for. Whilst it does vary from chapter to chapter, there are a lot of Brotherhood of Steel soldiers who are there just to simply make the world a better place. Whilst the primary objective for the Order is to get pre-war technology and hoard it for themselves, a lot of them want to use it to help rebuild the world and help the people of the wasteland. Their goals are for the betterment of civilization, and with a good leader at their disposal, humanity could really thrive with them at the helm. And with all that, in some cases the Brotherhood will happily form with other factions of the wasteland to help rebuild together, utilizing their strengths, like when they first formed up with the NCR or the followers of the Apocalypse. On some rare occasions, they even allowed super mutants, ghouls and deathclaws into their ranks. They are a military force, there's no question about that, and if done right, they are a force to be reckoned with, who really do want to rebuild the wasteland. On a similar note, the Enclave holds many of the same positives to the Brotherhood. Being once the shadow government of the pre-war years, the Enclave would hide away in their government bunker, planning the day that they would finally return and take their country back, and form it into what it was before the Great War. The Enclave also, like with the Brotherhood of Steel, has some of the best technology in the wasteland, with an army fixed on the highest grade military tech that was available, especially as it would have been given to the army who were sent to protect those within the government. government. Their power when in a full force would be enough to send back any other faction, especially with their air superiority and power armoured ground troops. Every one of their followers are extremely loyal to their cause, and like Caesar's Legion will do anything to make sure their goals are created. At the end of the day, the Enclave knows how the old world worked and wants to bring it back to the way it was before the bombs fell, with a stable, solid government and hierarchy. With good leadership, the Enclave could strive to win over the population and make sure they put their trust in the right people. Colonel Augustus Autumn, for example, made sure to put up propaganda posters all over the land to try and make it so the people knew they wanted America to be fully rebuilt once again, and he wanted Project Purity to go ahead and actually give the people clean water in an attempt to win over the people's loyalty. Like with all the factions, the Enclave do want to rebuild America and have plans to keep it secure with their technological might. But with all these positive things covered as well as some of the backstory, it's now time to cover the negatives of each faction and tell you all who I think would be best for running the Mojave Wasteland and New Vegas. Whilst it seems like every faction does have positive effects on the Wasteland to some extent, it is also pretty clear that there are darker sides to each one, and things that just would not help them, for if they wanted to be in charge of the Wasteland. To start with, let's continue on with the Enclave. The Enclave might seem like they know what they are doing. I mean, they were the shadow government once, but ever since the early days, their intentions are always extremely brutal and not really what the Wasteland would need. Back when the Enclave sought solace on their oil rig, their plans were to eradicate anyone within the Wasteland who were tainted from the effects of the nuclear war. The goal was to essentially start again by wiping out the Wastelanders and reforming America only using those who were part of the Enclave, the pure ones. Whilst Admiral Autumn wanted to create a change within the Enclave, hoping to win over the capital Wasteland population, it was clear that their president at the time, John Henry Eden, had other ideas and wanted to continue with the original Enclave plans. Maybe under new Enclave leadership, this faction could become better, win over the population, and use its wealth and resources to help rebuild society back to what it was pre-war days. However, all it would take would be one look into their past, and trust from the public would go out of the window. If people learned that they were behind the things like Vault Tech and the attempt at wiping out all those on the surface, I doubt people would ever want to trust this organization and want to follow them. I think it's safe to say that not many people like them anyway within the Wasteland, as they are very rarely seen, especially within the Mojave Wasteland, where their remnants hide away trying to forget their past. But if the Enclave were to return, they would have to really convince those that they were worthy of being in charge of the Wasteland, with a leader that people could really warm to and make sure war never happened once again. The same applies to the Brotherhood of Steel. Whilst they have done quite a few positive things in their time, especially in the capital Wasteland, their whole identity is extremely biased and very exclusive. The Brotherhood really do not like other factions using technology and will forcibly take it off them, believing them to be lesser beings. This creates such a horrible environment between them and the everyday Wastelander. Arthur Maxson was a prime example of the worst in the Brotherhood of Steel, as he despised ghouls, mutants, robots and synths, believing all of them to be abominations, making it so that anyone who were a ghoul or a friendly super mutant would be wiped from the surface of the earth, simply because their leader just didn't like them. Other leaders or higher individuals in their ranks are also so obsessed with revenge and technology that they will seek out weapons of destruction or experimental gases to help them wipe out their foes, like with Elder Elijah in the Sierra Madre, who wanted to use this mysterious cloud to destroy the NCR. The Brotherhood are just obsessed with technology that they forget others exist, and whilst they could possibly rebuild society in a new modern technological way, how do we know that they will actually protect some civilian outposts along the way? They could be so xenophobic that to them there's the Brotherhood of Steel bases and cities and that is it, and anyone else out there doesn't really matter. Like with the Enclave, the Brotherhood could be a great force for the betterment of the Wasteland like in the capital, but without good leadership, what is stopping them from turning the New Vegas Strip into a technological marvel at the expense of its people, who they sometimes see with great disdain? Moving to the more dominant factions within the Mojave, we have the Legion, and let's be honest, they are slavers who capture people, crucify them, or force them into work that they don't want to do. Whilst yes, some do like the protection of the Legion, the chances of being a supposed free individual within this society is very slim, as if you are captured, you will most likely become a slave, or most likely die a slave, or become a body on the battlefield fighting for a leader you don't fully respect, or the leader doesn't really care about your overall existence. On top of that, if you are a woman joining the Legion, be prepared to give up all of your rights, as all you will be seen as is a baby making machine. The Legion do not allow women to do any tasks that men do, and the best jobs women can do in the Legion is being a priestess who would look after the children who were either captured or born into the society. The Legion is extremely brutal and will burn down any village that gets in their way with no care for morals or who is innocent or an enemy. But one of the big issues with the Legion is, whilst they are feared by many tribes, if they did take the Wasteland and took over every other faction to secure their superiority, who would they then fight? The Legion has stated they are all about blood and glory, but if there is no blood and glory to be had, what happens to them as a society? Would they fight one another? It would be war within their own lands amongst their own warriors. And the worst of it is, Kaiser has not long to live, as he is suffering from a terminal illness. Once Kaiser has gone, who would take his place? Kaiser is not just any leader, he is their founder and an almost godlike being to them. If he goes, their tactics and great leadership that he offers goes as well. They would be lost without him unless someone equally amazing comes along, but in my opinion, no one can live up to what Kaiser had built and achieved. Mr. House, on the other hand, is a real crowd favourite, or is he? Whilst he has a lot of positives, especially in the fact that he poured so much of his wealth into protecting the Strip, as well as his people back in the day, he has quite a few flaws that could be worrying for if he became the overall leader. To start with, the man is now essentially a computer. His body is now extremely frail and decaying, with his Securitrons doing most of the work on his behalf. Whilst he still can communicate through his supercomputer, the human touch of a leader would be gone for the people of the Mojave Wasteland and New Vegas. He would never be able to meet people in person or make public speeches like that of Kaiser or any of the other factions, as he would be locked away within his daunting Lucky 38 casino with his unnerving Securitrons roaming about. On top of that, Mr. House only really cares about New Vegas. That is essentially his pride and joy, and before the NCR came, he never ventured his efforts outside of that area. It was only New Vegas. Hoover Dam is a prime example of his lack of efforts outside New Vegas, as he never attempted to take it to profit from its energy until the NCR claimed it. If House came to power, how much would he spend on rebuilding the lands outside of New Vegas? Or would he continue to build up New Vegas from within? Also, how much does he care for his people? Whilst he doesn't want innocents to die, he is a businessman and knows without people he wouldn't be able to build his businesses. Also, when meeting the courier, he has a very negative attitude towards people. Just speaking to them when they arrive, he looks down at the courier, seeing them as a lesser being until they help him out, then claims them to be their prodigy. If he has this attitude to just one person who he needs to help him out, how would he view others? Which brings us to the main issue with Mr. House. He is just one man. House is totally against the idea of a democracy, as he saw how badly it affected the world before. Under his rule, it would be an autocratic world, where his set goals would be what the Wasteland strived for. Whilst he's made it clear that he wouldn't want to be a dictator or a true autocrat, ultimate power can affect anyone, and leaving him to be fully in charge could mean anything could happen. Giving him that power, Mr. House didn't take long to wipe out the Kings and the Brotherhood of Steel, with him saying he got rid of them simply because he just thought they were stupid. Imagine going on your travels, meeting a group of friendly super mutants who have a new view, but because Mr. House doesn't understand or likes them, kills them all. That could be terrible for the overall morale of its people. With one person ruling, it could be good, as it's all one set goal. But if he started doing questionable things, taking out groups he didn't like, who or what is there to stop him and his Securitrons from doing that? And finally, we have the NCR, and whilst they breathe life back into an old world style of living, they again have a series of problems. To start with, the idea of people having to pay taxes makes sense to some extent, but then causes worry for many of the civilians who may not be able to pay them, meaning they may get thrown out of this safe society and make the poor extremely disadvantaged. That matched with the idea of forced inscription into the army may really not appeal to those who do not want to join. Also, the NCR are not afraid to just take communities and bring them into the NCR, even if the population do not want to be a part of them. The NCR can be quite forceful at times, and with their constant expansion outwards, what's to stop them from forcing people into their ranks and army? Not to the extent of the Legion, but at the same time not giving some communities a voice for if they want to be a part or not. The free market which they thrive on also might be seen as a good thing, as it is for a free society. However, due to rules in the legislation made by the president, businessmen living within the NCR cities can easily abuse this, buying up the Brahmin trade, becoming barons, agricultural barons, and gun merchants such as the Crimson Caravan, Fargo traders, and the gun runners ruling their industries. With these wealthy individuals thriving from this free market the NCR allows and profits from, it means the gap between the rich and the poor becomes higher, and in some cases can lead to electoral influence thanks to their money. Allowing humans to be humans at the end of the day can mean that living under the NCR rule can lead to corporate corruption, inequality in wealth, and monopolization of some industries. Depending on the leader, the NCR society could be great like it was in Tandy's time, with the public respecting her, or could be heavily influenced by corporations like with President Kimball. Depending on the vote as well, it could lead to another war-hungry president who, if not dealt with by their system, could lead to the NCR into another great war, especially if the politics start looking familiar to what was being done back in the 2070s. On top of all that, the amount of land the NCR owns sometimes makes it so their protection doesn't seem to work, as seen with Joanna Tippett's years, where she didn't defend her citizens from raider attacks. All it takes is for one weak president of the NCR, and some of the smaller towns under their rule could be wiped out from raiders or other smaller factions who know that their leader is weak. For the NCR to strive, they would have to make sure that their society is well balanced and able to fully defend themselves from the horrors of the Wasteland. And as witnessed in 2281, the weaponry and armor of the NCR isn't always at the best standard, especially compared to the other factions on the list. But with all the pros and cons covered of these factions, who would ultimately be best for the Mojave Wasteland? Well, before I say who I think, I do have to say I think Obsidian and to some extent Bethesda did a great job at making factions who have positives and negatives to them, making this choice quite difficult. It's so good for immersion and makes for great debates, especially as this game is quite old now. But with all that, who would I pick? Well, firstly, I would rule out Caesar's Legion simply because of how brutal they are. Also, the inequality they have in their society as well as their slave trade means that not a lot would want to be a part of this, and it would just not be good for the future of the Wasteland, especially when Caesar eventually dies. The Enclave would be the same, whilst they could possibly change with a new leader like Autumn or maybe someone better. I just can't see them earning the trust of the people, especially with their past of trying to wipe everyone out, and even with Project Purity, they just wanted to take the project for themselves to win over the population and did not care about anyone else involved or even try to negotiate with them about this. It was theirs or no one's. For me, they would abuse New Vegas and the Mojave like they did in the other locations around the country. And the same goes for the Brotherhood. With a good leadership, they can really help rebuild their society in a good way. However, their stance on technology and mutated individuals is too harsh, and they are far too arrogant to really rule. They are very xenophobic, and with so many split chapters all over the place, it would be very unlikely that they could band together and come up with a solid foundation for the Mojave, which leaves just Mr. House and the NCR. Whilst I truly believe Mr. House has the right intention, and I totally agree with his worries about what democracy leads to, putting your trust in a man who you could never see in person apart from behind a screen, who uses faceless security bots to do all his work, seems worrying. He is also just one man who has his own set goal. Whilst it might might be seen as a good one at first, how long is it before he tries something that doesn't agree with the population? If people don't like it, there is no way they can protest without upsetting him. And after what he did with the Brotherhood of Steel and the Kings, he could probably do that to anyone he wishes. He is also a gambler who trusted everything in one courier's hands. All it takes is one bad gamble and the people of New Vegas and the Wasteland could be in total ruin once again. I also find it hard to see him caring for outside of New Vegas. Would he rebuild the Mojave or just stick to fortifying New Vegas? Either way, whilst I think Mr. House is a solid choice and would understand why people choose him, for me the idea of one single man being in charge of everything with no way to protest would worry me, and there would be nothing in play to stop him from going power mad, which means the NCR would be my go-to. Whilst they have problems in terms of corruption within business, problems within their military at times, and times where they seem a bit forceful with taking over communities, they are a completely equal society where men, women, ghouls, mutants, and most likely synths can live together and have all the same opportunities as one another. Whilst taxes are annoying, if it meant better security all over the Wasteland, then it's a price worth paying. They have proved themselves with Hoover Dam giving people power and clean water, and if under the right leadership they could thrive quickly like they did in Tandy's years. Whilst there is another option of having an independent Mojave which would be amazing and my personal choice, the idea of the lone courier being in charge with Benny and his Yes Men Securitron system rebuilding the Mojave seems completely far-fetched, as neither have any experience running anything that big. Mr. House could, but those two I just felt couldn't manage it in the long run, and it could only lead to chaos. For me, whilst the NCR isn't perfect by any means, it's the faction which has proved itself to be the best for the Wasteland, looking after all of the civilians of the Wasteland without prejudice, and really aims to rebuild the Wasteland for the better, with some soldiers and people in their ranks really caring for the world they live in. Those are the reasons for why I would pick the NCR as the best faction for the Mojave and New Vegas. However, ideally in a perfect world, I would have the NCR and Mr. House equally working together to make the world a perfect place. Mr. House has good intentions, but I feel having that faction to hold him accountable would mean people could be far more relaxed about where they are heading. But in the end, maybe it doesn't even matter, because there is one fact that everyone knows, and that fact is that the House always wins. But those are my views on all the possible factions and why I'd pick the NCR over all of them. Let me know who you'd choose as the faction to rule the Mojave and New Vegas, and let me know why. And please remember, this is just a bit of fun, and if you do disagree, that's totally fair, but there's no need to get angry or sling abuse at anyone. It's just a friendly debate. I hope you all enjoyed this video anyway, and if you did, why not leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and why not check out my other Fallout videos where I go into more detail on the lore behind some of the factions. I'll link that in the description below. And if you really like this video, then you can also become a patron or YouTube channel member for early access to my latest videos, as well as them being completely ad-free. And speaking of which, I'd like to thank all of my incredible supporters real quick. Big thanks to our new small fish guys, our big fishes, Duquesne23, Sacrum, Rhinohead, Eddie, Andrew, Christopher, and our new guy Last Persona user, our sharks, the AVP man and Connor, and our huge megalodons, Sinus, Jacob Garcia, Wowsuch Gaming, Shadow SGT, and our new guy Chernobyl Stalker. Also big shout out to our YouTube channel member, our Wise One Jambu, as well as all my amazing subscribers over on Twitch. All your support means the world to me and means I can make these videos for you guys, so thank you all so very much. But that is all for now. Thanks once again for watching, and I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.